Good morning. Today is Sunday, November 22nd in the year 2020. My name is Diane Jordan. I serve as Director of Christian Education for Pleasant Hill United Methodist Church, located in Indian, South Carolina. I'm going to start us off this morning with a song. Alexa, play. Alexa, cancel music. In case you haven't guessed, we're talking about Abraham today. And I'm glad that you could join me for our adult Sunday school lesson. Abraham was originally named Abram, which means exalted father, and he was a descendant of Noah's son Shem. His father, however, was an idol worshiper, and he was 130 years old when Abram was born. Abram grew up to be a man of profound faith, and he was highly regarded wherever he went. Abram was born in Ur, and he lived there with his wife Sarai, which her name later becomes Sarah. He lived with his father Terah and his brothers. And Ur was a wealthy city, but it was an idolatrous city. Abram and his nephew moved his family to Haran, a city located in the Euphrates Valley in what is now southern Turkey. And it was also a large trading center for the area. Now, when Abraham was 75 years old, and he's still going by the name Abram at this point, he received a calling from God, and he obeyed God's call to move to Canaan, a land God promised to give Abram and his descendants. Now, Abram didn't balk at this massive undertaking that a move of his age would be. He simply obeyed. God promised to bless Abram by making his name great and by making him the father of a great nation, as recorded in Genesis 12, verse 2. God's promises or covenants with Abram are known as the Abrahamic covenant. And these covenants promised by God to Abram were the following. As recorded in Genesis 12:2, I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. As recorded in Genesis 12:3, I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. All people on earth will be blessed through you. In Genesis 12:7, to your offspring, I will give this land. Now, Abram had great faith in God, and so he packed up, he left his status as a wealthy landowner, and he moved his family. And as they were traveling to Canaan, there was a famine in the region. And Abram and his family had to go to Egypt because that's where the food was. Well, while they were there, they got put in a very bad situation. And Abram lied about Sarai, claiming that she was his half-sister, because he didn't want the Egyptians to know that she was his wife. Because the custom in Egypt was that a husband could be killed if someone wanted to take his wife. So the Pharaoh brings Sarai into his own household to add her to his harem. In the custom of the day, Abram is compensated for her with servants and livestock. But now he does not have the wife that he needs in order to fulfill his blessing from God. And so God sends plagues on the palace, which angers the Pharaoh when he finds out the truth. He banishes Abram and Sarai and their group from Egypt. Upon their return to Canaan, Abram has no choice but to split his herds between himself and his nephew Lot. Lot left for the irrigated plains of Jordan and settled in a place called Sodom. When Abraham was about 85 years of age, his wife Sarah gave him her Egyptian slave girl Hagar to her husband so that she could bear the child that Sarai was unable to bear. But when it works and Sarai sees that Hagar is pregnant, Hagar gives birth to a son, Sarai is consumed with jealousy. She had to suddenly allow that Hagar had status in the household because she is the mother of Abram's only child. When Abram was about 99 years of age, God decided to punish two cities, Sodom and Gomorrah, for their very sinful ways. Lot still lived in Sodom, and Abram intervened to save Lot and his family before the cities were destroyed. When Abram was 99 and Sarah was 90, God spoke to Abram again. God changed their names to Abraham and Sarah and reminded Abram that he would become the father of many nations. God instructed Abraham that he and all his male descendants should adopt circumcision as a sign of this covenant. Abraham and Ishmael were circumcised as well as the other men in their family. Now, although 25 years have passed since the promise of a child that was made by God, God did keep his word. Abraham is told that Sarah will deliver a son and is reminded of this promise when 3 strangers arrive at his tent. And they may have been angels in disguise, and they remind him that she will have a child. They say, when we pass through here this time next year, your wife will have a child. Now, Sarah is inside the tent preparing the meal for the gentleman, and she overhears Abraham being reminded of this promise, and she laughs. And almost a year later, a son that they named Isaac was born to them. Now, Sarah had laughed when she found out, or she heard the men talking, that she would have a child. And so she named the baby Isaac, which actually means laughter. Isaac was circumcised at 8 days of age in keeping with the covenant agreement. And Abraham held a grand feast in celebration of this incredible event. Remember, Abraham is now well up there in age. He is 100 years old, and Sarah is 90 when Isaac is born. And so they have a grand feast, and they are overjoyed by the birth of their son. But Sarah can't forget that Hagar had a baby first. Ishmael is now about 15 years old, and she's consumed with the fact that he is the oldest child, therefore the heir. And so it's really important to understand that in biblical times, a man needed a male heir to take over all of the family lands and livestock and to be the head of the household when the father died. And if you remember, Sarah had given her Egyptian slave girl Hagar to her husband so that she would bear him an heir. On the day of the feast, though, Sarah puts down her foot and insists that Abraham gets rid of Hagar and Ishmael. Abraham is troubled by her request, but he's instructed by God to do as Sarah has requested. And God promises that Abraham that Ishmael's descendants will become a great nation. So Abraham gave Hagar and Ishmael some supplies and sent them off. Now, Abraham's faith was most severely tested when God told Abraham to kill his son as a sacrificial offering. After a journey of 3 days with his son and 2 servants, they arrived at the mountain where the sacrifice is to take place. Can you imagine how Abraham is feeling during those 3 days of travel? Abraham tells them that they're at the mountain, and Abraham and Isaac continue on alone up to the top of the mountain. And Isaac says, "Hey, Dad, where's the sacrificial lamb? Did we forget something?" And Abraham tells him that God will provide it. When they reach the spot, they built an altar. Abraham bounds his son's hands and lays him on the firewood, and then raises his knife to kill his son. At the last moment, God intervenes by providing a ram that's trapped in a thicket, and Abraham sacrifices the ram instead. God then told Abraham that the pagan ritual of child sacrifice would no longer ever be tolerated in the Hebrew faith. And so God renewed his promise to Abraham about his numerous descendants. When she was 127 years old, Sarah dies, and Abraham purchases the cave of Machpelah as a family burial place, and Sarah's laid to rest. Abraham sends a servant to Haran to look for a wife for Isaac from among Abraham's relatives that are still living there. And Isaac marries Rebekah, the daughter of one of Abraham's brothers. Abraham himself later remarries a woman named Keturah, and their sons become the ancestors of the tribes of Midian and Dedan. After giving his possessions to Isaac and making provisions for his other sons, Abraham dies at the age of 175 and is buried next to Sarah. Abraham's descendants are the Jewish people through Isaac, and the Arab peoples descended through Ishmael. Also, if you recall, Jesus Christ himself was born through the lineage of Abraham. Some fun archaeological facts about the story of Abraham. The raiding route that the kings were said to have followed in Genesis 14 really was used 2,000 years before Christ. They have been able to find that. And again, they have documentation proof that laws and marriage contracts from Abraham's time indicate that Sarah's offer of her slave Hagar to Abraham so that Abraham could have a son, an heir, was very common practice at that time. It sounds reprehensible to us today, but at that time, it was the way that things worked. Thanks for joining me today. I'd like to cite my sources for our lesson today. I have the Haley's Bible Handbook, which is a fabulous resource. I have the Lifeway Bible Study Characters, Volume 1, The Patriarchs. I'd also like to thank the Smart Guide to the Bible, written by Larry Richards. I'd like to thank Who's Who in the Bible by Publications International, and my National Geographic 50 Most Influential Figures in the Bible. Thanks for joining me today for the story of Abraham. I pray that during the coming week, this week of Thanksgiving, you will stop and reflect on all the many blessings that we do have. It has been a hard year. This pandemic has been a struggle. We are going on how many months now? I mean, March will be a year. But it's also been a time for us to slow down, to really bond with those who live with us in our homes, to reflect on the many blessings that we have. And I pray that you have a safe and a healthy Thanksgiving this week. I'll see you next Sunday when we begin our study for the season of Advent. God bless.